Welcome to the Beatles Talk Show. Today
Hey
is
guys.
March 1st. We're going to look at Beatles historical facts through the years. Today's a very big, important day.
Why?
In this date in 1957, John Lennon, who was only 16 years old, decided he wanted to form a skiffle group with his buddy Pete Shotton, and they formed a band
Called the Blackjacks.
the Blackjacks. And I'm not quite sure if it was just a duo or not. Maybe not. But they changed their name after a week and called themselves the Quarrymen.
Now here's something real quick I'm going to throw in. We were doing a show in Edmonton going back about a decade and a half ago, and one of the Quarrymen, original Quarrymen, had moved from Liverpool to Canada in the late 60s or early 70s, and he actually came backstage at one of our shows and we talked for a while, and I can't remember his name. I always want to say Pete Shotton, but obviously it's not him, it's one of the other fellas, but a very, very nice gentleman. And he was telling me anyway about all the early days of the Quarrymen and the personalities of Paul and John and all. It was quite an interesting, at one of our shows to actually have him in the audience and come backstage and talk about this was, like, to me, really heartwarming. I don't know if you remember that.
The Quarrymen were named after their school,
Mm-hmm.
which even had a theme song,
Quarrymen
so that's
School.
kind of where they were paying tribute. And at that time, the band ended up being a five-piece and included T-chest bass, a banjo, and a washboard. So that was kind of their sound at the time.
Yeah, Bill Smith, Colin Hanton, Eric Griffins, Rod Davies, and Pete Shotton. So, those were the early Beatles.
Yep. On this date in 1964, the Beatles were in the recording studio in London, recording 3 new songs. I'm Happy Just to Dance with You,
By George. Yeah.
a song by John, but he let George sing it.
Really? George did not write that one?
No.
Interesting, I did not know that.
Paul did a punchy, lively version of Long Tall Sally,
Oh, okay,
classic,
Little Richard
and
song, yeah.
I Call Your Name, another
Sung
one
by
of John's
John.
song.
Yeah.
Yep. On this date in 1965, the Beatles were still filming their second movie, Help, in the Bahamas, and they did the restaurant scene at Cafe Martinique.
And you know who was in that movie? I mean, Victor Spinelli, there was a lot, Roy Kinnear, but also a lady by the name of Eleanor Braun. And I just wonder if Paul didn't take the name Eleanor Rigby from her name.
Yeah,
I don't know, who knows,
Yeah.
right? A year later.
On this date in 1966, a documentary of the Beatles was released
Yeah.
called The Beatles Shea Stadium, and of course it was
The year before.
broadcast by the BBC, yes, recorded on August 15th, 1965.
Yeah, they played there in '66 as well, but I don't think they filmed or recorded that. Maybe snippets of it, I think, not the whole thing. Yeah, so it was a good promo for the '66 tour anyway.
Yeah. On this date in 1966, the Cavern Club had just been closed this week, and 100 youths barricaded themselves,
Okay.
wanting to keep people from tearing it down. But of course, it went bankrupt, and it was going to go down, and that was the way it was.
You might have been one of those kids, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, it was silly they tore it down in the first place. Can you imagine if it was actually, they rebuilt it, like I said in earlier shows, they rebuilt it across the street, exactly the same style as a complete replica of the original Cavern, but it's not, because the Cavern Club was obviously on the other side of the street. And you know why they tore down the original Cavern in '66? You know why.
Parking lot.
Very close. They were building, they had a subway going underneath, and they needed a ventilation system that's right in the spot, so.
Well, they got to do what the city needs, eh?
Stupid.
Yep. On this date in 1967, the Beatles were in the studio in London, still working on A Day in the Life and
Okay.
Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know on this date in 1968, Ken Partridge was a design consultant, and he was hired by Apple to deal with the financial losses of the Apple boutique, which was a great idea of John and Paul's, but it was very short-lived.
Yeah, I don't think he did much to save it either. It didn't last very long. They were giving basically
Yeah.
giving everything away. So
Yeah.
how do you keep a business going like that, right? But the idea was cool. It was a real hippie idea. That kind of is cool.
Yeah.
Anyway.
On this date in 1969, Paul McCartney was in the studio working with Mary Hopkin, who they had signed to Apple Records, and she was recording her latest single, Goodbye, which Paul had written for her.
That's right.
And on this same day in 1969, Dick James sold his 23% share of Northern Songs to ATV, the Associated Television, owned by Sir Lou Grade. Now, Northern Song held the publishing rights for nearly every Lennon-McCartney song. And Dick James made his sale without notifying the Beatles that he was going to sell, and he didn't even give them an option to buy it.
Is that why Paul's songs were sold to Michael Jackson in the 80s? Is that the reason why? Or not?
Yeah, so at this point, neither ATV nor the Beatles now owned enough shares to grab the majority control of the company.
Okay.
So now a competition began to see who could buy up the shares.
Right.
And eventually Paul McCartney owned 100,000 more shares than John Lennon.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
1969, after 88 weeks on the charts, 88 weeks, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band drops off the charts.
So that was, at that time, a very lengthy run for an album to stay on the best-selling charts for a year and a half. That just showed the impact of how classic people thought Sgt. Pepper was at the time.
Yeah.
Very unheard of for a rock album to
right.
stay that popular for so long.
And one of my favorite quotes on this day, or one of my favorite things that happened on this day, is my favorite Beatle, Paul McCartney, announces he intends to release his very first solo album. This is 1970. There was a little bit of problems there because there was a conflict with Ringo releasing his album, and more importantly, the Beatles' Let It Be album was scheduled for release on that very same day. So what happened with that? How did they resolve that? Do you remember?
Well, you know, Ringo actually went to visit Paul to discuss this, but Paul actually threw him out. So obviously they had a huge argument. Ringo understood Paul's point of view. And so he actually did convince George and John that they should delay the release of the Let It Be album.
And they actually did delay the release of the album for Paul's album? Is that right?
They released the delay of the Let It Be album.
That's what I mean, yeah. Okay, well, interesting. Wow. So Paul,
of course, both were huge sellers in 1970, so...
Okay, cool. Both great albums, by the way.
Yeah. So what's interesting, though, if you put it in perspective, is that when people were like, oh, I'm hearing these Let It Be album cuts for the first time, I'm also hearing these McCartney solo songs for the first time.
That's right. That's right.
So they really, go together.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. On this same day, speaking of the Let It Be album, there was a promo film of the Beatles doing the songs Two of Us and Let It Be, and these were shown on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Interesting. The Beatles never performed live on the Ed Sullivan Show after 1965. They basically just sent in film clips. Which is unfortunate because in 1966 Ed Sullivan went in color for the first time. The Beatles had stopped appearing on there, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. On this date in 1972, John and Yoko started recording their latest album sometime in New York City. It was a double album they did, featuring a lot of political songs. This was sort of, you could probably say John's least successful album he ever released. Didn't sell that well, didn't have any commercial big hit songs on it, and featured a bunch of Yoko songs as well. In fact, as I always like to say, the Yoko songs are my favorite on this album.
Yeah, it was very much of a, for me personally, it was a disappointment on that album. Except there was the live, there was a 2-album set if I remember, and one of the albums was a live.
Jamming.
And one of the songs he did is "Baby Please Don't Go." Great tune. That's to me the highlight of that song, or that album. Sorry.
Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention were the band performing in that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It didn't sell anything.
On this date in 1973, there were 2 unauthorized Beatles bootleg box sets that were on the market called Alpha Omega Volume 1 and 2, put out by a company called Audio Tape Incorporated. But these had to be pulled from the market because the Beatles' new albums 1962 to 66 and 1967 to 70 were going to be released shortly after this point.
You know, and I remember that as clear as yesterday when they released those two albums, and everybody bought them. Everybody bought the red album and the blue album, as they become to know.
Yeah.
Everybody had them. Everybody discovered the Beatles.
That was the first truly successful cashing in on the
Yes.
Beatles' name years after they had broken up.
That's right.
Something that goes on to this date.
Yeah.
Did you know on this date in 1974, John Lennon asked the U.S. District Court for a temporary restraining order against the Immigration and Naturalization Bureau to delay a ruling on his pending deportation case.
Okay.
And he would be denied. And of course, he went through a couple of years of battle with all of this.
There is a new document, well, not new documentary, it's fairly new. It's called John Lennon versus the U.S. It has come to light that his phone had been probably tapped, he was being followed. This was during the Nixon administration, the Hoover years. So they were really keeping a close tab on John Lennon, the troublemaker, the political activist at this time. When he was denied. I think it would have been a good time for him to get out and go back home, myself, considering what happened. But he loved America. I mean, he just loved New York. That was meant for him, he said. And so that's cool. I respect that. But it's just too bad in hindsight.
Yep.
Anyway, on we go.
On this date in 1975, John Lennon was a guest presenter for Record of the Year at the Grammy Awards.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. On this date in 1983, FBI documents were released dealing with John Lennon, speaking of that. And some of this deleted information was featured in a 1984 book called Come Together.
Do you know that to this day, if you were to bring up those documents, they're still blacked out? There's huge chunks of paragraphs that are blacked out for whatever reason. So, yeah. Scary stuff, man. But John had a lot of power back then. He could sway a lot of people away from the war and away from government agendas of the time, I guess you could say. So.
Did you know on this date in 1985, this is one of the most intriguing facts of the Beatles in the 80s, is that EMI was going to release a new Beatles album called Sessions, which featured all unreleased tracks. But then they chose not to release it. Now, could it be because this was at the glut where Beatles merchandise was not doing well and they just thought, let's not bother? Or was it because they had bigger plans in the long run? And so the album was not released, and yet bootleg album copies surfaced right away. I even had a copy of this album.
So did I.
By the next year.
So I think it was a blunder on EMI's part. I hate to say that, but they should have released it anyway. Or maybe they should have waited the 2 years with the resurgence in '87 and then released it. I don't know.
That probably would have made sense, yeah.
That would have probably made more sense, yeah.
On this date in 1986, Yoko Ono was doing a world tour, and right now she's playing in the Netherlands.
Okay.
And in 1993, they started to work on the Beatles anthology, and George Martin said, I've gone and listened to all the unreleased recordings, and he says, it's all junk. He says, I don't want to release any of this stuff. So that might be why, a whole bunch of the Beatles unreleased takes have not been released. Yet, of course, they would pick the most interesting ones for the anthology, so obviously they gave us some stuff, but they really felt that was about it. They just don't want the rest of it out there. They just go, it's not high quality stuff.
And I think what George Martin meant by junk is not like the songs are junk, because John Lennon, in my opinion, never wrote very many bad songs, if any. But the quality themselves, John would just sit by his bed on the grand piano on acoustic, and he would have a little tape recorder. He had a little drum machine, and just go, you hit the drum machine, be like, that's what you'd hear, and then he'd play into the single little microphone. Well, how are you going to make something of that, right? We keep talking about how they, in my opinion, they should re-release the Hamburg tapes, and with the new technology make them into these great recordings. But as we talked about, how can you do that when you have a mono recording on a single microphone on a little tape deck, right? And I think that's why George called them junk. What's your opinion of that? Do you agree with all that?
Well, yeah, it's the point of view that, George Martin cares about quality and keeping the Beatles' name. He doesn't care about keeping the fans happy and releasing everything. I've always said, it would be great if they would just release absolutely every take of everything. Make a
Everything.
massive 100 album set.
We'd buy it.
We would buy it.
We would
because
buy it.
we appreciate
Of course.
all of it from a historical point of view.
Yes, and I keep telling Paul, writing Paul, saying, man, release it all. The bootleggers have it all anyway. You might as well make money off it yourself, you know.
And he needs the money, so he should.
Well, for sure. Yeah. I'll look after that part of the business, Paul. Just leave it to me. Give me the go-ahead on that.
All right, well, there you go. Beatles news for March 1st. That was a hectic, busy day.
It was.
We'll see you again tomorrow.
All right, take care. At ease.
So my dear friends, come back when you can.